A deafening silence fell over the Manhattan federal courthouse as Janice Combs, the 83-year-old mother of Sean Diddy Combs, was led to the witness stand. No one in the courtroom, the seasoned reporters, the astute lawyers, the curious onlookers, could have anticipated this moment. Diddy, who had maintained a confident, almost impenetrable facade throughout the tense weeks of the trial, suddenly stiffened. His hands, which had been flipping through documents or gesturing to his legal team, froze. The defense attorneys exchanged nervous glances, while the prosecution sat up straighter, eyes sharp as if they knew this was the moment that would change the entire course of the case. There had been no warning, no indication from the prosecutors. Only Janice Combs, the woman who had been Diddy's rock through decades of ups and downs, walked slowly but steadily to the witness stand. As she placed her hand on the Bible and took the oath, a murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Arun Subramanian, known for his cool demeanor, raised his eyebrows, seemingly taken aback by the presence of this witness. Up until that moment, Diddy had maintained the demeanor of a powerful star, speaking confidently with his attorney, occasionally smiling at supporters in the stands, and seemingly unfazed by the seriousness of the charges against him. But when his mother, who had known him since he was a boy growing up in the rough neighborhoods of Harlem, who had sacrificed everything to support his dreams, prepared to speak the truth under oath, everything changed. Perhaps it was the unwavering gaze she gave the prosecutor. Perhaps it was the realization that the woman who had once defended him against all criticism was now on his side. Or perhaps, deep down, Diddy knew that what she was about to say would destroy the defenses he had built over the years. Whatever the reason, the moment Janice Combs took the stand marked an irreversible turning point in one of the most high-profile trials of the decade. When she began speaking, the world knew that the truth, a painful and unforgiving truth, was about to be revealed. The trial of Sean Diddy Combs had dragged on for weeks, riveting the attention of the global media. The charges against him, from human trafficking to extortion to abuse, had painted a grim picture of a man once revered as a symbol of success and power in the entertainment industry. The courtroom was packed, with reporters crowding into designated booths, markers constantly capturing every moment, and curious onlookers lining up from dawn to secure a seat. Each day of the trial brought new revelations, from testimony from victims to testimony from Diddy's former associates. But no one, not even the most seasoned legal analysts, could have predicted how the day would unfold. The morning began like any other. The courtroom was filled with whispers, lawyers discussed strategy, and Diddy, in a perfectly tailored suit, exuded confidence as he reviewed documents with his legal team. The air was tense, but there was no sign of a turning point. Until the prosecutor stood up and announced, "The United States calls Janice Combs." The courtroom fell silent. Some in the audience thought it was a mistake. A few reporters looked at each other, trying to confirm what they had just heard. But when Janice Combs emerged from a side door, ushered in by a court officer, all doubts were dispelled. Janice, despite her age, maintained a dignified demeanor. The dark blue gown she wore exuded simplicity and dignity. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane, but her back was straight and her gaze unwavering. When she sat down on the witness stand, no one dared to breathe heavily. Diddy, who had been hunched over documents, looked up. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. His hands, which had been moving nonstop, suddenly froze in midair. The defense attorneys, led by Anthony Russo, immediately began whispering to each other, their eyes wide with confusion. The prosecutor, Elena Martinez, began in a soft but firm voice, "Ms. Combs, thank you for coming today. We understand that this is a difficult decision." Janice nodded slightly, adjusted her glasses, and looked directly at the prosecutor. "I'm here because the truth needs to be told," she said, her voice even but determined. A murmur spread through the audience. Mr. Russo stood up, protesting vehemently, "Your Honor, family conversations are protected by the right to privacy, and Ms. Combs' testimony would be severely prejudicial to our client." Ms. Martinez immediately retorted, "There is no legal privilege protecting conversations between a mother and her adult son, especially when it involves criminal charges." After a brief discussion on the sidelines, Judge Subramanian overruled the objections and asked Combs to continue. The courtroom fell silent. Reporters stopped typing, sketch artists' brushes paused on paper. Even Diddy's family members in the audience looked stunned. Janice, not looking at her son, began to tell her story, a story not just of the case, but of a mother's journey to discovering who her son really was. The prosecutor asked about her relationship with Diddy. Janice took a deep breath, her voice filled with both pride and pain. I raised Sean alone after his father was murdered when he was a baby. I worked multiple jobs from cleaning to retail to provide for him, to give him the opportunities one never had. I wanted him to be strong, to succeed, and he did. He exceeded every dream I ever had for my son. She talked about Diddy's early days as an ambitious young man in Harlem. Sean was always charming, always a leader. He had the ability to convince anyone from a young age. He had a natural talent for making dreams come true. Her face softened as she recalled Diddy's early successes, from being an intern at Uptown Records to founding Bad Boy Entertainment. I was so proud I couldn't even put it into words, she said, a smile flickering before her eyes darkened. But then, she said, things began to change. The success came so fast, so completely. Suddenly, everyone was saying yes to him. People wanted something from him: money, fame, opportunity. They treated him like he was above the rules that apply to other people. And I started to see him believe that. The prosecutor led her through memories of the 2000s, when Diddy's career was at its peak. Janice described the disturbing behaviors she noticed: his increasing control over those around him, his outbursts of anger when challenged, his lack of respect for moral boundaries. At first, I thought it was pressure, she explained. The entertainment industry is tough, and Sean was taking on too much. But then I started hearing strange things, seeing unusual things when I visited his house. She recounts a surprise visit to Diddy's Miami mansion in 2008. I showed up unannounced. Mothers have a right to do that, she says, drawing a chuckle from the audience, momentarily breaking the tension. There had been a party the night before. When I walked in, the staff was cleaning up, but not the usual after-party cleaning. They were collecting phones from the rooms, like they were cleaning up. A young girl was crying as security escorted her out. When Sean saw me, he was angry, almost hysterical, because I hadn't told him. The prosecutor held up a photo. "Do you recognize this place?" Janice examined it and nodded. "This is Sean's pool house in Los Angeles. He turned it into a studio around 2010, but it was very secretive. I wasn't allowed in, which was strange because I was always welcome around the house." She described her growing concerns, her attempts to talk to her son. "I asked questions. That's what mothers do," she said, her voice growing firmer. "But he brushed me off, saying I didn't understand how his world worked, that it was all voluntary, that it was the music industry lifestyle." When the public allegations first surfaced in 2017, Janice called Diddy immediately. I asked him straight out if there was any truth to them. He said they were lying, that they wanted money, that this happened to every successful man in the business. She paused, her eyes distant. "I believe him. I want to believe him. He's my son." But everything changed in late 2023, when Cassie's lawsuit was filed. She confronted Diddy again, this time at his New York apartment. "I said I want the truth, not what his lawyers tell him to say, not what he tells the public, just the truth between mother and son." The courtroom was silent as she continued. "He was different that day, tired, maybe his facade was cracked. He didn't admit everything, but he said something I'll never forget: 'Mom, I didn't build what I have by playing by other people's rules. Sometimes people get hurt. That's business.'" Her voice cracked for the first time. "That's not how I raised him. That's not business. That's not right." She told of seeing surveillance video in 2024 in which Diddy attacked Cassie in a hotel hallway. "I called him right after I saw that video. I asked him how he could do that. He said it was a difficult time in their relationship, that I was just seeing a moment out of context, that he was no longer the same person." "Do you believe him?" the prosecutor asked. "No," she replied simply. "Not anymore. Because I've seen those outbursts over the years, not directed at me, but at employees, business partners. The Sean in that video was no stranger to me. Realizing that broke my heart. Janice told of finding disturbing notes in Diddy's office in early 2024, a list of women's names with notes like dealt with and potential problem. When she asked, he snatched the paper out of her hand and said it was business. The prosecutor presented a document, Janice's notes from 2008 to 2024, documenting disturbing behavior and conversations. I started taking notes because I was afraid I would lose perspective, she said. My love for my son blinded me. Writing helped me see the pattern, and what I saw was terrifying. She described a final conversation in April 2024, when Diddy was in pretrial custody. I went to the detention center, and it was just the two of us. I said I needed to hear the whole truth before I could continue to support him publicly. I said, Sean, I love you unconditionally, but I need to know what I'm behind. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking. She continued, he was quiet for a long time, then he said, the truth is, I created a world where I made the rules, where whatever I wanted happened, happened. People either followed it or they were left out. Right? No. Was anyone hurt? Yes. But that's how power works, Mom. Janice trembled slightly as she continued. I asked about the specific allegations, the parties, the tapes, the drugs, the threats. I needed him to deny it if it wasn't true. But he didn't deny it. He said, it started out voluntary. No one was forced. But once they were in that world, the lines became blurred. Sometimes they changed their minds later, but by then they had taken the money, they had benefited. She shook her head. I told him that consent achieved through pressure, through fear of consequences, through intoxication, that's not real consent. He just looked at me and said, that's not how my world works. After Janice's testimony, the prosecutor called Dr. Margaret Chen, a family psychologist who specializes in cases involving powerful public figures. What we saw today was extraordinary, Dr. Chen said. In high-profile cases, relatives often remain silent or supportive despite the evidence. Ms. Combs' testimony suggests that she reached a moral breaking point when the dissonance between her love for her son and her awareness of the harm he caused became too great. Dr. Chen explained that Diddy's statements to his mother, like that's how power works, revealed a worldview warped by wealth and influence. People with great power are often surrounded by people who reinforce their sense of privilege, shielding them from consequences, she said. A mother is often the last person to break through that insulation because she knew him before he had power, before he had money. She analyzed Janice's notes, showing how she moved from justifying her son's behavior to recognizing a pattern of control and exploitation. As Janice left the witness stand, she looked at Diddy one last time, a look that held love, disappointment, and a faint hope for redemption. Diddy, for the first time in court, collapsed. His confidence was gone, replaced by resignation. After a break, he barely responded to the lawyers, seemingly caught up in his mother's words. The next day, in a surprising turn of events, Diddy's attorney asked him to address the court. After being sworn in, Diddy took the stand, no longer the flashy look of a music mogul. He wore a simple dark suit, his eyes thoughtful. I listened to my mother yesterday, really listened, he said, his voice low. I realized I had been hiding from the truth for so long that I almost convinced myself with lies. My mother taught me about respect, integrity, treating people right. But I had lost those lessons. Diddy admitted to creating a system where consent was distorted by power, where threats and financial gain overshadowed true free will. He told how wealth and fame warped his perspective, leading him to believe he had the right to make his own rules. I call it leverage, but it was coercion, he admitted. When questioned by prosecutors, he confirmed many of the allegations from his victims, admitting that his memory of some events was blurred by drug use. The prosecutor asked, Mr. Combs, you say you created a system where consent was compromised through force, intimidation, and coercion. Do you realize that this fits the legal definition of the crimes you are charged with? Diddy nodded. I've had time to think since my arrest. I've learned about these laws and understand how they apply to my actions. When asked why he initially pleaded not guilty, he looked toward the empty seat where his mother had sat the day before. Yesterday happened. Hearing my mother tell me the truth that I had denied for so long broke something inside me. After the testimony, Diddy's attorneys requested a private conference with the prosecutor and the judge. When they returned, Diddy announced that he had changed his plea to guilty. After hearing my mother's testimony and reflecting on the facts, I can no longer deny responsibility, he said. The judge accepted the plea change, scheduling sentencing in 6 weeks. As Diddy was led from the courtroom in custody, he no longer looked like a powerful star. He looked like a man facing the consequences of his actions, driven by the inescapable truth of his loving mother. Janice, who was present at the sentencing, sat in the front row as the victims read statements about the impact Diddy's actions had had on their lives. Their stories of ruined careers, shattered trust, and bruised self-esteem brought tears to the eyes of many in the courtroom, including some of the jurors. When he was allowed to speak before the verdict was read, Diddy stood, his voice quiet but firm. I want to apologize to everyone I have hurt through my actions, the women who trusted me and were betrayed, the colleagues and employees I dragged into my actions, my children who now have to live with the legacy of their father's mistakes, and my mother who taught me to live better than I did. He paused, his eyes on Janice. I cannot repair the harm that has been done. I can only acknowledge it and try to live better from here. Janice also issued a brief statement outside the court, her voice trembling but filled with dignity. Today was a difficult day, but necessary. I love my son unconditionally, and that will never change. But love without truth is not true love. I hope this is the beginning of healing for Sean, for those who were hurt, and for our family. The trial ended not only with Diddy's guilty plea, but also with a broader shift in the entertainment industry. Companies began to review their internal policies, artists cut ties with Diddy, and other victims from across the industry began to speak out, sharing their stories of abuse and exploitation. Janice Combs' testimony was not only a turning point in the case, but also a reminder that even the most powerful people must face the truth, especially when it comes from those who love them the most. Outside the courtroom, the world continued to react. Social media was abuzz with discussion, with fans questioning their support for Diddy over the years despite persistent rumors. Old interviews were dug up, revealing vague hints from industry figures about how things work. Entertainment companies held emergency meetings, canceled Diddy-related projects, and reviewed contracts. The internet began to connect the dots, suggesting that Diddy's behavior was not that of an individual, but part of a larger systemic problem in the industry. When Diddy left court, he looked less like a man who had lost a legal battle and more like a man who had finally found peace in admitting the truth, however belatedly. For Janice, testifying against her son was not a betrayal, but the ultimate expression of love, a love that demanded truth, accountability, and the hope of redemption. The case of Sean Diddy Combs is not just a story about the fall of an empire, but also a testament to the strength of a mother who stood up for justice, even if it meant facing the greatest pain of her life.